This is a short summary of Patrick Lecture 121, Substitution, Displacement, and Superimposition. And this is week 3, where the focus is on displacement, which is about shifting needs into other currents, other channels. And what I found is that this lecture resonates really well with people in the groups, and that they get it really well. And so there are a number of lectures that can easily be picked up and used with other modalities or used for whatever you want. This is one of them. Another one is the vicious circle, which is Patrick Lecture 50. So I've included it in this month's materials as a way to understand how when we feel stuck, we may push and displace, etc. So that vicious circle is another lecture that I teach as a toolbox lecture. It's a skill. It's a tool for helping you sort things out and analyzing. So it's not all in your head. You've got some things to do on paper. Now, for the rest of the summary, I'm going to reference a half dozen other Patrick lectures because that's how powerful this lecture is. It resonates with a lot of other teachings. For instance, when we shift needs into other channels, this is gone into in detail in Patrick Lectures 44, Love, Sex, and Eros, and Patrick Lecture 207 on the spiritual meaning of sexuality, when talking about the sex channel, the sexual force, and how very often the sexual force gets overused. Because if it can be used, it becomes a dumping ground for other frustrations. It's a way for us to express our life force in a relatively healthy way when we are blocked in other channels of our life. The dilemma, of course, is that if we're taking energy from other areas of life and pouring it into the sexual channel, that channel becomes overused and it can become dysfunctional. We're no longer using it as a tool, we're using it as a weapon for displacement. Another lecture that you can pick up from this is transference, which is Patrick Lecture 118, where we transfer a dilemma we have with one person onto another person who may have a similar characteristic or trigger us in a similar way. Now, part of the difficulty in doing this work is that the way we perceive things is always rational on some level, but it may not be rational on an intellectual level, a level that we can understand, discuss, defend, and analyze. So that if it's happening on a feeling level, on an energetic level, we just may not be able to get our head around it. We don't know how to discuss it. And if we don't know how to discuss it, we may never get a better understanding of it. So that in transference, until we're aware of the transference, we just think that person's a problem. It may remind us of somebody else in our life, but it would not occur to us that we are actually acting out our initial problem with a parent, for instance, onto a boss or a relationship. But in the lectures on transference and also Patrick Lecture 73, the compulsion to recreate and overcome childhood hurts, the unresolved issues of our childhood, they're unresolved and they seek resolution. So we are looking for a place to act them out again. So we have to recreate them so that we can win, so we can resolve it. So this becomes a compulsion that we may not recognize. So this goes from, for instance, from parents into work and school situations sometimes, and then it will move into intimate relationships because those are close to our heart, like our parents were. Whether they were affectionate or not, whether we had affectionate feelings for them or not, all children want to love their parents. So the frustration of not being able to love a parent leaves you pent up with this, something's wrong, and then it acts out later in life. The other lecture that I found very useful in explaining this is Patrick Lecture 127, which I mention a lot because it's a toolbox lecture. It helps people structure what's going on. And the name of the lecture is The 4 Stages of Spiritual Evolution. The idea is the 4 stages are automatic reflex, where we don't have no awareness. And then there's awareness, and then some understanding, and then a knowing. Now, when there's not an issue here, when there's no resistance to the process, we don't know, we become aware, we gain some understanding, aha, we got it, and we move on. And it doesn't necessarily replicate, it doesn't recreate, it doesn't repeat itself. The dilemma is when we have a resistance to something within that process, so that we don't move through it quickly. So think of it in terms of eating with a spoon when you're a little kid. If you don't have an issue with eating with a spoon, you just have to learn to control the spoon. And unless it's become a battle with the parents, or unless you're allergic to metal or some other factor comes in, most kids learn to eat with eating utensils and life moves on. And then you just know how. It's not a battle. Things become a battle when other things have been displaced into them, so that it's no longer about the spoon. So in these 4 stages is a point where you don't know what's going on. You're not aware of what needs to be done. And then you become aware. Now, if you become aware of too much, let us say too soon, it's frightening, it's overwhelming, you don't know what to do, and you shut it down. Yes, there was awareness, but it's not useful awareness. In fact, it builds up scar tissue, it builds up a fear of that awareness itself. So what we're looking for here is a place where the awareness begins to creep in, and you are willing to deal with some of it, but it still doesn't make that much sense. It doesn't explain everything. And so when we reach for an understanding, we may reach for a partial understanding. Now, historically, in terms of human evolution and civilization, people look up at the sky and they see the heavens rotating and they think, well, we are a ball, within a sphere. So there's a heaven and there's us. They notice that they are repeating. So they see themselves in a ball that is circling them, whether it's flat earth or whatever. And that satisfies their curiosity. It explains things. And then they begin to notice anomalies. Some things aren't matching the way that theory would dictate it would happen. And so we gain more understanding, and we come up with a more sophisticated and complex theory that explains these anomalies. And this goes on and on and on. It's going on today with the space telescopes. So that we are working with awareness, understanding, more awareness, more understanding, back and forth. This can feel like you're not getting anywhere, but it feels like that when we want the problem resolved. We want an answer. We want a solution. We're not patient. We don't see this as a process. We see this as a problem that we want the problem to go away. So that you go from awareness to understanding back into awareness. And of course, in awareness, there's not that much understanding. And so the guide describes this as the longest and most painful stage. And you don't get out of it. You just keep going in and out and in and out of it until the cliche or the idiom is until the penny drops. When the penny drops, there's a knowing. There's a place where it all comes together. Even if there's more to learn, you have an understanding that is reliable, that leads you to say, I think I know what's going on. I believe I understand. I believe I can cope with this now. And I can gain more understanding, but I have a knowing. in the knowing phase, there are other lectures that are they're good phrases to get used to. One is psychic nuclear point, which is Patrick Lectures 214 and 215. And I like those titles because they're self-explanatory. A lot of people get it. Psychic nuclear point. It's the funnel. It's the center of the funnel where something drops down and you're done. The trick is that you may be done with that particular phase of life lesson, but there may be a larger reality going on. In other words, life is not simplistic. We're not here to learn our ABCs and learn how to read and pass the tests and get a job and die. That's not a spiritual life. Those are different tools that are handy for us to address underlying false beliefs. Now, those are hard to figure out. They're really hard to figure out. And that's what the resistance is to getting the knowing, because we're hanging on to some fantasy, some false belief, some image, and we're trying to hold it and make reality fit that. And that's why we can't find the knowing. We can't relax into it because it will cost us this false belief. Another way of describing this is a vicious circle feels like a circle. It's a useful phrase. It feels like a useful circle because we don't see progress. However, that's not true. Organic life, human consciousness, doesn't sit still. So it's in constant motion. It's learning whether it wants to or not. It's changing whether it wants to or not. Because stasis, from the lecture on contraction, expansion, and stasis, 3 stages, 3 stages of cosmic evolution. From that lecture, stasis can be a pause, but if it lasts too long, then it has to be broken or the organism will die. And so in this lecture, I brought up the spiritual meaning of crisis, which is what happens when you're stuck. So if you're in a vicious circle and you're truly stuck and you're not making much advancement, there will come a crisis that will knock you from that current situation into another situation. Patrick Lecture 183, Spiritual Meaning of Crisis. So that it will eventually become a spiral. Now, the spiral of development doesn't have a lecture. It's mentioned in Patrick Lectures 36 and 9. I usually give out a worksheet by a helper that I knew named Dottie Titus. And the guide describes a spiral of development. So if you could imagine a spiral, and you go around, and as you pass through the same point, you may have a similar experience. That may be true. However, it's not exactly the same. And depending on your speed of development, your willingness, the tenacity of these false beliefs and images, as you go around, you get better and better. This is why it's a spiral, and it tightens up until it drops down into that psychic nuclear point. Now, once you have the knowing, people say, but I don't understand. I know what this is, and yet the situation occurred again. Here's my explanation. When I was in school, sometimes you'd walk in, high school in particular, sometimes you'd walk into class and the teacher would have something on the board and you'd sit down and they'd give you a blank piece of paper. Hi, welcome, it's a pop quiz. So you were going to be tested, but it wasn't a pass-fail test. It wasn't going to be something that was graded, but you were going to be tested on what you knew. And it was a pop quiz, pop-up. That's how I think of some of the lessons that are repeated even after you have the knowing. I think it's a test. I would think that if Spirit wanted to find out, do you really understand what's going on? They would test you. They would give you pop quizzes. And if you pass the quiz easily and quickly, eventually they'll move on to something else. But if you fail the pop quiz, it means you may need some remedial work. You may have backslid a little bit or not have grasped the full meaning. So you had knowing, but it needs more knowing for you to move on. And that would be why, even though you have a knowing, you would experience it again. So in my life, there are concepts that I understand and places in my childhood where I understand all the links. And I will be in that situation again. And at first, I won't realize it. Automatic reflex, stage 1 of Patrick Lecture 127. And then I become aware, oh dear, okay, this is a recreation. And then I look for understanding of why this person is triggering me. What is the common element? What is it in me that got triggered? And I will work that out and disengage from what isn't relevant in the moment, fix the issue at hand, but not load it up with a bunch of emotional stuff. And then relax into, well, I know what happened, and I'm not going to get caught by that. And sometimes that can happen in 2 or 3 minutes. I, however, have other situations where it can take me a few weeks. What can I say? It's the process of being a human being. Some lessons are tough to see all the iterations of. It's not easy to see all the different ways you can get caught. I think of myself sometimes as a piece of Velcro, and the world is full of hooks and I'm full of loops. And you just have to learn to disengage yourself quickly and easily without drama and continue. So that summary of week 3 involved a whole bunch of different lectures because the lecture itself seemed clear to people. They seemed to comprehend how they substitute, how they displace, and how they superimpose to confuse. So hope you read the lecture. It's really good. And thanks for listening.